Going to go ahead and kick off our webinar. Welcome everyone to the Texas Children and Nature Network's webinar, Forest Bathing Research with Dr. Courtney Crim with Trinity University. My name is Alice Jansen and I'm the Education Events Coordinator with the Texas Children and Nature Network, and we are very happy to have you with us today. We have Mark Broughton. He's the STEM Environmental Education Center Director with Dallas ISD, and he is helping us with our tech today. Thank you so much, Mark. We appreciate you being here. We do have automated closed captioning for this webinar. You can click the Show Caption CC button on the Zoom toolbar for the live transcript options. We are recording our session today, and so to save bandwidth, we ask everyone to turn off their cameras and mute themselves during the presentation. I will be monitoring the chat, so you can share your questions there, and I will share them with Courtney during the Q&A portion of the presentation. And I know Courtney has some questions for you all at the start of the webinar, so you can put those responses in the chat and I will read them to her. What else? I will be sharing the recording of today's webinar in a follow-up email. And if you are uncomfortable with your name showing, you can change your name to anonymous and then private message Mark with your name for our attendance purposes. You can change your name by hovering over your name, then click the three dots that appear. Also, if your Zoom name does not match the name you registered with, please change your name or private message Mark with your name. This part is very important, so please listen carefully. Only registrants that attend the live webinar are eligible to receive a certificate of completion. We do not automatically send all attendees a certificate. You must request the certificate after attending the live webinar. The email you received with the webinar Zoom link has the specific instructions for requesting the certificate. So we will be taking attendance during the webinar. That's what Mark is helping us out with today. And we will be checking the attendance list to confirm your participation. We need the name you registered with to issue the certificate. If there's any questions about that, you can private message me in the chat. All right, I'm going to read our land acknowledgement. The Texas Children and Nature Network is headquartered in Austin, and as such, I am on the ancestral and unceded land of the Tonkawa, Comanche, and Sana people. Our ongoing colonial presence on indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through the Texas Children and Nature Network is one small step towards that effort. I will also put some information in the chat here in a moment to learn more about land acknowledgements and these indigenous peoples groups. I just want to thank you all for being here, and we have a very special webinar planned for you all today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Courtney. Thank you, Courtney.
Hi, thank y'all. I feel like I haven't done Zoom in quite a while, so I know I'm sharing my screen, but I'm not sure if you can, I've got the chat pulled up. I'm not sure if that shows up on y'all's end or not. But I do have a quick question. So the original topic of this particular webinar was focusing on instruments, ways to actually conduct research with forest bathing. And when I sent in my description, I'm trying to honor that as much as I can, but also looking at the idea of providing some research that's already there that supports why forest bathing is beneficial. So I'm just curious if you can just like throw in the chat really fast, are you looking for more information on research that supports forest bathing or on conducting your own research with forest bathing? I don't know if there's a way to do that really fast, but if I can get some of you to reply in the chat. I plan on doing both, but I want to know, there's a lot there. So I just wanted to see maybe where I should spend a little bit more time, and I'm trying to watch it pop up. Okay.
All right, so research on forest bathing, research that supports and reports on forest bathing, both research that supports forest bathing, research data that supports both. I want to see research that supports forest bathing, research that supports it versus how.
Supports both. Okay. All right, thank y'all. That gives me some idea on where to spend most of my time, and so I think I'll just be able to cover both. But I'm also in the meantime going to be trying to be mindful of the time because there's so much information that we can cover. So yeah, so this is looking at forest bathing, and I noticed a couple of you put in the comments that you are trained with ANFT, and my colleague Laura Allen and I are both trained with ANFT. When we initially started our work with forest bathing, it was to create a university course, the natural environment and well-being. And we knew we wanted forest bathing to be a part of that. And so to be able to implement that with validity in our research, we both became certified guides. So I hope you're having as great of experience as we did. But as Alice said, I'm here at Trinity University and been working with Texas Children in Nature for several years now, and was happy to hop in and do this one. So I'm hoping that I'm able to cover a lot of what was initially put in the description. So as we get started, and this, I realize I am so preaching to the choir, but just play along with me for a little bit. I want you to take just a couple seconds and stare at this screen. And then just throw a couple words into the chat of how this is making you feel, either physically or emotionally, or just words that come to your mind as you're looking at this image. Stressed, rushed, gray, tense, claustrophobic, chaotic, stressed, loud, stressed. I need fresh air, terrified. Okay. Sorry if I didn't get to yours. These are popping in so fast, agitated, anxious. Good, thank you. So we know that, right? That's not something that's really new for us. We understand what that does. Now take a couple minutes or seconds and look at this one. And I'm going to ask you to do the same thing with the chat. And just as you're paying attention, what are the noises? Or like on the other ones, I put healing, calm, tranquil, serene, peaceful, still, literally made me smile. That's a great one. Refreshed, open. All right. Thank y'all. So many great words coming through there. I appreciate it. So with this, we know personally that when we get outside in a natural area, we feel better, right? We feel happier, we feel less stressed. And a lot of times though, we get this idea of, well, why? Maybe it's just the idea that I feel better. Is there actually research to back that up? When we started designing our course, there was this idea of, well, you want kids to get credit for going out and spending time with trees. Yes, we do. And being able to really back this up with research. So a lot of times when you're thinking about using forest bathing or just even time outside in either your work context or your school context, I know we have a lot of educators on the line. There's actually a lot of research to back that up. And sometimes just being knowledgeable about that lets you kind of have that ammunition, for lack of a better word, of how to really talk about why being outside is good for our brains and our bodies. So just to give you a little bit of background with that, it really became something that we looked at. We've known it. Indigenous populations have used the outdoors as a healing source for forever, but really started looking at kind of modern day research in the 1980s. And people were starting to get involved with it. And there's some interesting studies that came out. Really in the decade between 1980 and 1990, Japan really started focusing on this very heavily. And I'll cover that a little bit more. And then as we hit the 2000s, we started seeing other European nations really start to focus in on this. And the US kind of started to come in about 2010. We are still pretty much lacking behind in the rest of the world on this, but we're getting better. We're stepping up. So that's great. So a lot of the work and research that's done in this area is more of the biological sciences, a lot of quantitative information. But knowing also as we go into this, that the research behind this encompasses different ways of knowing. So it's not just the classical knowledge of cognitive, perceptual, focusing on an object, something that I can quantify and use in my discussion. But there's also an indigenous perspective that looks at the metaphysical. It looks at it holistically as the whole person, whether it's relational ideas, connections, spirituality. Robin Wall Kimmerer talks a lot about this, and Wendell Berry. These are just some of the examples of when you're coming into the research and talking about the benefits, that it's not always going to be just this, well, I would say true kind of pure science, but there are multiple ways of knowing that come into this. However, most of the people that we're speaking with, trying to convince people that there are benefits to being outside, kind of fall back onto the quantifiable, the more traditional ways of knowing. So getting back into the research, a lot of this really started with Japan in the 80s. And this is a lot of when the high-tech industry really started to take off. So a large part of their population was spending all their time indoors now, and they weren't outdoors, they were inside, and they started to see tremendous increases in disease and heart conditions, cancer. So they really started to look at, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about this as a country? And this is when they started asking the question of what happens when we spend time outside in nature as compared to when we use urban spaces. And so that was one of the research questions that came out of this larger government study. And this is when Shinrin Yoku, which is the original conception of forest bathing, began. So it translates literally into forest bathing, because what you're doing is you're taking in the forest through all of your five senses. You're bathing yourself in the forest throughout all parts of your body. So they realize that, if you're doing this in a calm and relaxed manner, that you can improve health. And so they developed the idea of Shinrin Yoku with the Japanese Forest Service, are the ones who really started to put this together. And they began to study the practice and then testing different effects that it would have on overall health. So they used it comparing walking and sitting in a forest as opposed to sitting or walking in an urban environment, actually being around plants versus looking at pictures of plants in different ways. And so they started to really see that there were a lot of benefits, and it's now actually incorporated in their national healthcare system as a preventative way of addressing health issues and disease that was on the rise in their country. Gosh, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't remember the exact number. It's either 60 or 80. I know it was one of those. They currently have like we'll go with the low number, 60 healing forests around Japan that they use as part of their national healthcare system as a way to address improving health. So my research team, I work with there's a team of 5 of us, and we have a biologist, an anthropologist, and a science educator, and then Laura and I work with diverse populations and adolescent development. So putting together, looking at a lot of different studies, and then what we were also finding is that there are a lot of, if we just want to put it in a nutshell, some benefits of being in the natural environment. So again, if you're working in this field, in this area, a lot of these things, but these are all different benefits that has strong research backing as to why being outside is good for us. So, improving sleep, and you can just kind of look at all the numbers that pop into here. Decreasing blood pressure on the emotional end, decreasing depression and anxiety, which is a huge factor, especially for young people, college students nowadays, and being able to proactively address some of those issues, which was why we actually developed our course, was with that in mind. Cognitively, it increases your working memory. Some people look at that bottom arrow and say, oh, it decreases your prefrontal cortex. That's not good. It's actually very good, because that's where your executive functioning is happening. And if you can decrease that activation, it means you're not stressed. You're not in these stressful situations as much, and you're actually letting that element of your brain kind of recoup and restore. Social, it really increases pro-social behaviors, which, especially coming out of COVID in our digital world, is really important. So this is kind of overview. I won't go over each one of them. So when we talk about the research on the mechanisms that link the natural environment and well-being, there's several more out there, but these are the 4 that we find most often in the literature. And I'm going to go over each one of them individually. But you have biophilia, and then stress recovery theory, which then led into attention restoration theory, which is the one we tend to focus on the most in our work, but I'll discuss that. And then the Phytoncide hypothesis. And so there is some work with different groups trying to figure out which theory is most at play here. And different theories are, being supported in different ways, but most suspect that these mechanisms are all working synergistically to create that combination of conditions that just really work. They increase our, you're doing a couple things. You're increasing physical activity, you're socializing more, you're getting rid of some of the bad stuff. So the air pollution, the noise pollution, if you're out in more natural areas, is going to be a better benefit. So there's lots of things that are happening together, but these are the four main mechanisms that we'll look at. So the first one talks about biophilia, and what this does is suggest that we as humans, like any other organism that's around us, we select an environment that's going to have a natural space, the characteristics that allow us to survive, right? So that's all about evolution. How are we going to ensure the survival of our species? And so what we know with this is that we prefer natural environments to, over some kind of synthetic ones. Our brains are problem-solving machines. That's what they crave to do. They're trying to find patterns and things around us. And so when we look at really positive environments that we seek out, a lot of those environments tend to have some type of moderate fractal quality. That means they have geometric complexity, that complexity that our brain is always seeking. And it might not be immediately apparent, but our brain is seeking those patterns. And so there are things that interest us and that we gravitate towards. There's actually a Facebook group that I follow, and it's like fractals in nature. It's got these great images of how you wouldn't necessarily see it, but they're there, and I'm finding those. And so there's some research, they talk about this in Nature Fix with Florence Williams, that some of the research links this idea of fractal quality to why people like Jackson Pollock's work, because you're seeing and seeking out those fractal patterns. But we also look at this in nature. And so it might be that a tree has, multi branches coming out, and looking at patterns and repeating patterns that you see there. But it also goes back to that evolutionary piece of how do we ensure the survival of our species? And so we're looking for places that have an elevated position, kind of like for safety, or will provide a range of vegetation or things, because we know that we can search for food. Very often near running water. So this is why you'll still see things that lakefront property is very expensive, because as humans, we're still seeking out these spaces that have signaled a safe place, which, we're going to have an abundance of food. We're going to have an abundance of the things that we're going to need to survive. And so this is where we will settle. So we will tend to have that internally as part of our DNA. And so biophilia hypothesis says that we just feel better in these natural environments because we know, based on evolution, that this is going to be a place where we're going to be able to be safe and continue to be safe, continue to grow as a species. So it's one of the earlier ones. Then one of the ones that came in was with Ulrich's study, and started in 1983, but the one that is I think the most used, I think it's the 1991 one, is looking at the psychological benefits of natural environments. And this is where he proposed the stress reduction theory. And this is going to overlap with attention restoration, but it began first with the stress reduction. And what he claims here is that you're able to recover or restore from an aroused state. So if you have a lot of stimulus coming in and your body's just getting hyper aroused, whether it's physically, emotionally, that when you're in nature and when you create that calming environment with nature, that your body's able to recover or restore itself from that state. And so it happens physiologically and psychologically, so our body and our minds. And that stress recovery is part of that big idea of restoration. When I can recover from the stress, I'm able to restore these factors for my body and my brain. He also included with his work depression and anxiety, which I think for many of us that tends to be something that we keep coming back to. The foundation of his theory, it was really interesting, and you may have heard this if you've looked into any of this research, is and I can't even remember why it was, but for some reason, a large number of patients were getting their gallbladders removed at a certain time, at one time in a hospital. And part of the population that had their gallbladder removed, their rooms were looking out windows that had views of trees. The other group were looking out windows that had views of buildings. And so they just started looking at these different groups. And those that had windows that had views of nature recovered faster, were released sooner, fewer pain medications, fewer complaints than those that had the built environment. So that really kind of started to cement this idea that nature has a calming or inhibiting effect that promotes this stress recovery. It allows us to kind of block out all those other things so that our body can start to recover from that stress. So stress reduction theory is where it kind of started to really get into the science piece of it. Kaplan's followed this with attention restoration theory. It's ART is the way you will find it listed very often. So what this suggests is that the natural environment has a way of reducing our mental fatigue. That's a lot of where our stress, depression, and a lot of the disease and unhealthy attributes come from, the idea that we're just fatigued mentally, physically. And so we need to decrease that fatigue so that we can increase our attention and our ability to focus and get things done. So with this, if you're, let me use my guy. Okay, so when you're starting a task, if you've got something to do, you start off with really high attention. You're able to really keep this going, and it continues to grow. The longer you're doing this test, so across time, the longer you're working on this task, your attention starts to really come down. You're not able to focus anymore. And so to restore this attention, you have to kind of have effortless attention. You have to kind of check out of that part of your brain to let it fill back up. When I talk about it with younger children, I speak about it with the idea of glucose, because your frontal cortex uses glucose to make decisions. And so when I'm focusing on a task, I'm using that glucose. When I'm trying to block out things that are happening around me, I'm using that glucose. And so when I start to get fatigued, my frontal capacity is like a gas tank that's just empty. There's no more glucose. And so I have to like let go of focused attention for that gas tank to start to fill back up. And so that's where we want to look at the effortless attention. Sorry, my little mouse is running around. I'm trying to find out where it is on the screen. So with attention restoration, they really focus on the idea of hard fascination and soft fascination. So hard fascination is when your attention is held by something visually stimulating, like you've got to really kind of focus on it. There's a lot going on. When you looked at that first image, that was very much hard fascination. You're seeing things that's stimulating you. It's creating emotional and cognitive responses, but you don't have the opportunity to really go back and reflect with that introspection, and you're just completely absorbed in it, and you just move to the next thing and move to the next thing. And that's very much how our society is continuing to just get faster and faster. And so that requires all of that hard fascination from our brains. To restore, you need to be able to add soft fascination. And so this is when your attention has something less, stimulating, or not less stimulating, but less forceful, less kind of in your face. These activities are more kind of open and slow. They allow opportunity for you to reflect on what you're doing. So knowing the idea between hard fascination, which is how we normally function in society, and trying to build opportunities for soft fascination, which is where force bathing really comes in, because when you're out in nature and you're not being forced to keep up with a rush. Before y'all came into the room, I was trying to figure out how to turn off the text notifications on my computer because it kept dinging. And so you're blocking out things, you're bringing in things with that hard fascination, and finding opportunities for the soft fascination to really work with our bodies is what's important. So direct attention, which is voluntary, like I'm going to choose to pay attention to something. I'm going to say, oh, it's really hard, but I'm going to block out those people that are walking down the hallway. This requires your mental focus. It's limited. And like I was talking about the gas tank, it depletes. It is a finite source. And so your executive functioning part of your brain is using all of those abilities, cognitive flexibility, my working memory that I've got, all that is depleting that energy in my brain. So the indirect attention, which is not something I choose to necessarily do, I just kind of go with what my body's finding interesting or what it's paying attention to. It doesn't take effort. It's induced by, interesting stimuli, but it's soft. It's kind of whatever I'm choosing, those fractal patterns that my brain is just kind of on its own naturally seeking. And this allows the energy to restore. So over here on the right is, if I've got directed attention requirements is really high, and if that's greater than what my brain has the capacity to do, then I've entered fatigue. And this is where we then need to focus on how do I restore that part of my brain. The way this works is if I've got all this requirements of direct attention, focus, pay attention, block out things, what I need to do is decrease that. I want to decrease the requirements of the directed attention. And I do this for now creating opportunity for the soft fascination. I do this with time in nature. And we know that this really supports that soft fascination. And as I spend that time in the nature, I'm able to then increase my directed attention capacity. That's where I get the restoration. If I can increase or make my capacity that I need equal to or greater than the direct attention that's being required of me, then I'm hitting an element of restoration, which is what we're wanting to head towards. So just quickly on this, because I don't want to spend too much time, but I add this because we use attention restoration very much in what we do with our class. There are 4 components that help an area be restorative. We include this because we want students to purposely, if you're going to spend time outside, one thing we hear a lot is we don't have time to get outside. If you're going to spend that select time, when you spend that select time getting outside, trying to find areas that will be very restorative to your body and your brain. So the 4 components, one is extent, and that's feeling like totally immersed. The more nature, the better. The less built environment there is, the better. But it doesn't have to be in the middle of some forest miles out of town. This can be done in city parks. This can be done in little pockets where you just feel like you're kind of tiny with this big area. We see this a lot here on our campus just with hammocks, because they'll kind of wrap themselves in a little cocoon where they don't see anything else around them. They don't see the buildings around them. What they're seeing are the trees and the sky above them. So they feel like they're very immersed with that. Second area is being away. And this could be physically, or it could just be mentally. So if it's the stress of your office and these cognitive tasks that are really weighing on you, just being away, moving outside, moving to an Adirondack chair, having, finding a picnic outside that's different, away from where your physical stress space is, can help that as well. Or it could be physically, where you're just away from the busyness of life. Fascination, this is going to be anything. There are just a lot of different things there that can capture your attention. So this is where you get into the soft fascination, the effortless attention. So the sound of water is something that we know to be very helpful. Patterns in light coming through trees, leaves that rustle, textures that are around you, just all the soft fascination that goes back to the original idea of Shinrin Yoku that taps into your senses. So what am I hearing? What am I seeing? Maybe it's a bunch of smells, a bunch of textures, that soft fascination that can come in through any of my senses. And then compatibility. What is it I'm seeking? So you can have a place that is really great in the top 3, but if I don't feel safe there, or if I feel like I'm in danger, then that's not going to be a restorative environment. So it's got to be something that's compatible with what you need. So it needs to be safe. Maybe you need to be, have it quiet. Maybe you just need a small space with friends, and that's the purpose it's going to serve for you at that point. So looking for these 4 areas as you're finding restorative places. And then the last one that we look at as far as one of the foundations for why being out in nature, and specifically forest bathing, is beneficial is the Phytoncide hypothesis. And what we know with this is that trees give off phytoncides. It's basically a chemical that is released, especially in coniferous trees, which we see most often. We have a lot of in Japan. And this chemical that's released has antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antifungal qualities that help the trees fight the disease that might be coming into them. It also alerts other trees that these things are happening. So these chemicals create and carry these messages. And what we know is that humans evolved with trees right alongside them. So we, as humans, as a species, have a really great response to these same chemicals. So we can breathe them in as they come into our body. We can absorb them through our skin. And again, this is where it goes to the idea of forest bathing. You're bathing in these phytoncides. And our body likes this. And when they have these phytoncides and they're absorbing them and bringing them into our bodies, there's a certain type of white blood cell that we increase. It's called a natural killer cell, an NK cell. And these cells just kind of run through our body and they kill tumors and viruses and infections that they find throughout our body. So in one study that they did, the NK activity was increased. They had a 3-day, 2-night forest bathing trip, and the benefits for the NK cells in the body were, lasted for more than 30 days. So it is physically, biologically something that helps us with our bodies. So in a nutshell, you're stressed and there's these different restorative effects of nature. And this can be where we get that synergistic effect that, I'm creating that, I'm lowering my cognitive load, increasing my self-attention. Maybe it's the antimicrobial exposure. I'm increasing social interaction, whatever the inferences may be. And these individual differences are going to be moderated by who we're all going to need different things, right? So to fit our purposes, there's going to be different levels of different pieces coming together. What this creates is the physiological relaxation, and then our immune system is having the ability to recover from different stressors. Our cognitive abilities are able to restore. And so this creates that evidence-based medicine piece that allow countries to see that there's preventative medical effects that can come from this time outside in nature. When we were first developing our course, we were looking for areas, other colleges or universities that had a similar course. We really couldn't find any. The only one that we found that really talked about the benefits of nature and well-being was at Harvard, and it was in their School of Medicine. So, there's definitely a lot that supports this. So one of the most recent ones, not most recent, it's been about 5 years, but that has come out is like, how much is enough, right? So White's exposure study looked at the fact that at minimum 120 minutes per week is what we need at minimum for these benefits to start to happen. Ideally, 200 to 300 minutes per week would be great. They controlled for all kinds of factors: air pollution, how green your neighborhood is, if you had dogs or cats, and all these things were controlled for. And they found that these outcomes were the same. Didn't matter your age, didn't matter your income, didn't matter where you lived, that these numbers seemed to hold really true as far as quantifiable benefits that they could see. It didn't matter if you were in the woods, if you were on the beach, if you were in an urban park, just this nature exposure was really great. It didn't have to be all at one time. It could be broken up, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. But whatever it was, 120 was your minimum. Up to 300, after 300, they didn't continue to see increased benefits. So that's where they look to say this would be the ideal. They do know that the richer the biodiversity of the setting, that the greater the stress reduction is going to be. So you want to get out into those really rich environments, and that's going to help maximize the benefits of these. One app that I learned about just the other day when Alice and I were on the phone, is Nature Dose, and it's an app, and it lets you put in your goal of how many minutes a week you want, and it keeps track of it, and it's got these little codings that'll tell you how rich that area is as far as nature rich, and it'll tell you, well, you've got this much, but it was only in these really kind of not really high nature areas, or yes, I had this many minutes in this really high nature area. So it's really kind of cool to just see. I didn't even start with 120. I was like, I'm in the office all the time. This is really bad. I put 100 minutes, and to see how quickly that adds up is kind of fun. So some of you said that you're looking at, how are we doing on time? Looking at how do I measure my own impacts and outcomes? And there are so many different ways to do this, and I'm certainly not well versed on all of them, but I'll share what I do know and some different things that are out there. A lot of this can kind of depend on what you need to do and what you have. If you've got access to a medical school and you can run cortisol tests and those type of things, that's going to be really great. But a lot of that comes with high funding. If you're in a school and you just want to convince, your administration that having 2 recesses a day instead of 1 is going to be beneficial, you're going to be looking at different measurements that you would want to be using. So first one I'm going to start with is the biometrics. And these are the ones that typically would be with the idea of high funding, a lot of, high-tech medical equipment that you would need to have access to in different ways. And there's some really great work out there that is using this. So not all of my images specifically have to do with nature, because I was trying to find images that reflect what some of these different ones are, but some do relate with that. So on this first one, it's looking at heart rate variability. And I had to learn what this was because I'm not in the medical field, but you have your heart rate and then you have heart rate variability, which is the space between the beats. And with this one, you actually want this to be higher. You want your heart rate to go down, but you want your heart rate variability, what's happening between those beats, to go up, because the higher that number is, it means the more efficient your body is working to get oxygen across your body, whatever other benefits it might need to do. And so with this, I'll try and walk you through this. It shows that when I'm just at rest and I'm starting the experiment, the gray line being urban sounds and the green being rest. So depending on what sounds I'm going to be listening to in the study, this is where my resting area starts. I'm listening to the different sounds, and then when I have the sounds plus a task, my heart rate variability goes down. Remember, we want it to be high for efficiency. And then where's my line? Okay, when I take away the task and I go into rest mode, this is the variability that I would have. And so the higher, the better. So what this does is it compares, I keep losing there I am. It compares across. So those that are listening to the urban sounds, when you look across, it doesn't really do anything to increase the heart rate variability. It starts here, goes down, comes right back up to the same space. When I look at the nature sounds, I decrease with the task, but then when I rest, that nature sound actually creates a much bigger, so you can see the incline here of efficiency with my heart rate variability. I'm able to do much better. And so this compares within those groups, nature to nature, urban to urban. This compares across the group, so it's like a difference in difference design. And the nature sounds, this is where they're averaging. So they were averaged at a higher heart rate variability across all areas than the urban sounds. So when I compare the 2 ways, they also see that the nature sound is more beneficial. This is the fMRIs, and this is really cool. It's the functional brain imaging. So you don't even have to do that in a hospital now. They've got things that can hook you up to, they can send you out, they're portable. And what this does is it actually records what's happening, the activity in different parts of the brain. This specific one image, if you're looking at it, and I did put the citations in here if you want to look at it more, but this one is specifically on meditation. It's not about nature specifically, but I was trying to find one that had really good images to show. But this really shows as you're out in nature, or the depth of it or the time of it, they can look at many different variables, what parts are activating in your brain and what parts are recharging and what parts are being used or not used, or how it's shifting. And so they can get so much really high quality medical data. If that's where you are, obviously this is not my area of expertise, so I can't interpret it all for you. But if you're in the medical field and you have access to biometric factors that are going to help you collect this data, those are really good to use. Now, this last one is looking at cortisol, which I did work with cortisol a little bit when we started, but it was very expensive. It was kind of hard out in the field because you have to keep it frozen. We were doing saliva. So what this group does is when you wake up, your cortisol, is here, and I think it's about 30 minutes after you wake up, your cortisol tips its highest, and it continues to decrease throughout the day. And what you want is that decrease. So what they did is the blue dotted line is they took that skewed curve that was there, and I'm guessing they put it into a linear regressive model to be able to get that straight line. But they moved it into what would it graphically look like as a straight line. So over the decrease of the day, length of time a minute to decrease it, I would get this nice steady line. So the gray line is if nothing changed. The blue line is if on our normal cortisol patterns of where, I don't know why I keep losing this guy. Okay. Of where it would go. And then the red line is now going back again and using the same statistical method to create when I include, oops, trying to find my cursor. There we go. Sorry. When I include the nature exposure, you can see that the cortisol decreases even more. And that's what we want. The lower the cortisol being your stress hormone, that the lower that goes, the better off your body is biologically going to be. So these are just some examples of the biometric data. If you have access to places that can help you with this, that's great. We, like I said, did the saliva test. You can also do cortisol with hair samples. I don't have a way to test that, but we worked in conjunction with our biology department, and they have the centrifuge. The Bio 101 students need to learn how to use them, so it worked great. We could collect it, give them our samples. They learned how to centrifuge and draw out those levels, those cortisol levels, and then give us back the results. So that's something that worked really well as a partnership. But due to funding and keeping things frozen when you're out in the field all day, in nature in Texas became a little problematic. So there's ways to do this, definitely, which are super interesting. But again, funding would be something that you need with this, and then access to the equipment that allows you to examine these areas. And those aren't all of them. They're just some that I'm sharing with you. Some of the other forms of data that you can collect are performance-based data. So this would be things like how cognitively, how much can you focus and make sense of things, make meaning of things? How much can you remember? How much, what areas are you able to concentrate in? So this one, the visual remote association test, I am not even sure I could do it with all the nature impact. So they give you some words, and then you have to find the similarities. How do they fit together? So like, I always think of it like taboo. You can't say cheese, but what can I do to say to make you think about it? But so giving you the words, cottage, Swiss, cake, and these all have the idea of cheese being the commonality. You can also do it visually. They have what that is one of the options. So it's a door handle. Let me show what that was. I think it's a glove. There we go. A door handle, a glove, a pen, and that similarity being hand. So it's kind of like these little puzzles that you would get, that you would solve. And so they look at what is your accuracy and speed before, what is your accuracy and speed after. So you would have one group go urban, for example, one group of nature, and then how do their scores change? Do their scores change? And if so, how do they do that within comparison? So the digit span test is another one, and these have been around for a very long time, where you're giving a recording and you've got to remember and write the numbers. So there would be a recording voice that would say 9, 2. And on your recording sheet, you would write the numbers 9, 2. It's about how much you can hold in your memory. So when you get down here, you're going to hear the voice say 7, 2, 0, 9, 5, 8, 3. And then it's time to write. How much of this do I remember? And how far can I get down this list before my working memory can't hold all the digit spans? So that's another one, and that's performance-based. Trail making over here is interesting. We used this one for a little while, but then found that the ceiling wasn't high enough. They were capping out before we got to the end of it. So this one starts with its focus and, being able to concentrate and find patterns. So you would start with 1, and you're just using your pencil and you're connecting the dots kind of like in an order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's to see how far you can get by connecting these numbers within a certain amount of time. So if I say 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then to see with the next one, with the post test, are you able to focus more or are you focusing less? We had a problem with this because our students finished the whole thing before the minute was up with our pre-test. So that isn't one that ended up working very well with us, but it is one that is in the literature quite a bit. I just lost my view of y'all. Sorry about that. So trail making is one that we saw very often in the research. And so what we did when we started is we just started looking out there and saying, when we look at the important research, what tests or what assessments or what tools are we seeing most often, and use that kind of to gauge where we wanted to go next. These are self-reflective tools. We find that we actually use these most often now as our source. That doesn't mean anybody else needs to. It means it works for our projects and what we were doing. So profile of moods scale is PALMS. And I've got some research. I'm going to have some links for you on this where you can see. It's a Likert scale. And so they would look, and there are many, many more options, but how am I feeling? Am I feeling tense? Not at all, a little moderately. And they self-report. And doing this as a pre and the post as well after these nature experiences. This is reflection and rumination quality. Quantity. We looked at this a lot because it pulls out. Rumination is reflection is fine, and that's great. Rumination is where you just get stuck on it. And it's that negative part of reflection. And so what this does is it pulls it apart to see how much of that reflection is actually rumination, which is what we want to decrease is the rumination. So it gives them, again, the same style of answering. And there's other ones like a connected to nature scale. So for instance, if you really aren't focusing on the rumination, you just want to see, is my group connecting to nature better after nature experiences, then connectedness to nature scale would be something that would be very beneficial. And then there are other ones that are more qualitative, and they don't have to be as easy as this. I'm actually doing a very heavy qualitative one right now, which is all open coding, and we've got hundreds of pages of data. So that, you know, is a completely different methodology. But these can be more of like the simple ones. Like, I just want to see if I'm having fewer office referrals when we move to 2 recess, periods a day. Are fewer kids requesting to go to the nurse because they're tired or sick to their stomachs or have headaches. You might just want to see, when we offer these experiences, do more people come back and visit the park? And so those are just more kind of observation things that you would be counting frequencies. Achievement scores, that's a hard one. You have to do a lot of controlling for different variables. I don't necessarily, being a teacher educator, I really don't like to base things on achievement scores, but I know with some funders or some organization, that's specifically what they're going to be looking at. So with this, you would want to use a control group that's not having the experiences, but you'd want to be able to control for a lot of different variables. Maybe it's just acts of kindness in your classroom, and I'm going to keep a tally of, before we go outside and have the outdoor experiences or after. And so this can be, again, combined with forest bathing, like full-on forest bathing experiences, or it can be just increased time outdoors with your population. With these, though, note that variables should be controlled for. If you're using controls with that, often they're not. It's just kind of like, these are the numbers I come up with, which are fine, but know that if you're bringing that into funding sources, you're going to want to look at instruments that have some type of control or validity to them. So I did give a list here, and I'm not sure how this works. If in the recording, I may have to just put the links down and send those to Alice. But there's one on creativity, executive functioning, which is the trail making. It's the one I showed you with the dots. And this is the one I showed you, the RRQ, rumination and reflection. The one that have the orange asterisks are ones that we're actually using or have used very recently. Profile of moods scale is one that you see very often. This one actually breaks up into subgroups, and I printed it out. You can look at tension and anxiety, depression, anger and hostility, fatigue, confusion, and vigor, which is more like high activity. And so these can go in different ways. Some are going to want to go up. We're going to want vigor to go up. We're going to fatigue to go down, tensions to go down. So they will go in different directions. And what we do with our students is we do a pre and post on just a full day forest walk. We take them outdoors to like one of the state parks, Guadalupe Rivers, where we went this year. We do a full-on forest bathing walk, all the pieces. They have lunch. They have the afternoon then to do whatever they want, except for no phones and no schoolwork. And we do a pre and post with that. And then we give them these long strips. They love them. It's like, okay, the data says that this should happen with your body, with you taking the pre and post. This is what happened to your body. And you can have all the research in the world, and they're 20 and they're very egocentric, which is not bad. It's their job. But for them to see like, oh, wow, this is exactly how my physical person reacted to this experience. is pretty powerful, and seeing them that this is good. So we have the profile of moods. The brief resilience scale is a new one we've added, and this looks at resiliency. We're trying to build that in this particular population. Connectedness scale, which I showed you that one. And then we've recently added the mental health continuum form. And this has 3 factors: emotional, social, and psychological well-being. We did not find significant difference in emotional and social, but we did find it in the psychological well-being with ours, as far as looking at that with exposure over time with nature. So these are examples of when you're looking for specific tools, to find ones that have validation studies that show that they've kind of been put to the test, and using those as much as you can in your own research. You're going to have to ask yourself a lot of questions, though. What's the question right up front you're trying to answer? If I offer forest bathing workshops, do more people revisit the park? That tells you what you're going to need to do. And then what kind of data do you need to answer this question? With that, what methodology am I going to need to use? Am I going to have to find somebody to help me with the statistics? Do I know statistics? That's great. Do I just need pre and post? Am I going to have iPads where they can just click it? I'm going to have, paper sheets, whatever it might be. If you need an instrument that you're using, what kind of validation ones are you going to be able to find? And that's exactly what we did. We just started digging through the literature and which ones do we see that keep coming up over and over. And then what resources do you have to work with? If you don't have a lot of people to help you out, and you don't have the funds to do something, it might be you sitting at the front of a park with a checklist. But if you've got time and technology and funding, you might be able to do something completely different with that research. So it's really examining what resources do you have to help answer that question. And then maintaining consistency. Maybe if you're doing a lot of different walks, you're not collecting data on every single one of them. You want to do it in one way that you can be very consistent and do it the same all the way through, which is one reason Laura and I both became certified forest therapy guys, is because we were going to be using it year after year with different groups of students. We needed to make sure we were doing it the same and consistent with these different groups. So finding that as well. So if you're using different classrooms in a school, for example, you might not want to have all these different classrooms. You might want to stay with 2 teachers that understand what the purpose is. Although they may all be having 2 recesses instead of 1, you want to focus in that data collection on areas that you can maintain that consistency throughout, because that will really help you build relevance and validity to the work that you're doing. I'm not just doing different groups every time. I'm doing the same group with the same teacher. So if the variables do change, they're going to be minimal, so that you can keep that high quality to what you're doing with your research questions. So I know some of you are looking at my time.
There are a fair amount of questions, Courtney, in the chat.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I can do this. If you're looking at forest therapy, again, it's engaging, like I said, without, I do have, I was going to do a short invitation, but I don't think we're going to have time. I do have here on this last slide that we're doing a webinar in August, Laura and I, that's talks specifically about the course and how we've infused forest bathing in different activities, and how the outcomes are for our student well-being. And then also TCINN is having their summit in Waco this year, starting December 11th. And I'll be doing a forest bathing walk as one of the pre-conference options there too. So if you have more interest with that, you're welcome to contact me, but also know that these other options are coming up. So, okay, Alice, what questions do we have?
Okay. All right. We got
Hope I can answer them.
fair amount. Yeah, no. People are wanting to know if you're going to share your slide deck as a PDF, if you are willing to share your
Yeah, I don't know how to do that, but
we'll figure that out. But
yeah.
people
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to share
slides. Yes. Okay, awesome. So she will
that'll be the easiest way, I think, for those links to share.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so then someone asked, Malaya asked about a recommendation for a reasonably priced, good quality forest bathing training for educators.
Yes. ANFT is kind of expensive. And I realize that. I don't know other ones currently that are out there, only because we researched it like 4 years ago. We specifically chose that one because it is very trauma informed in its curriculum, which we found very beneficial. I have been very happy with ANFT only because I thought their training was very, very thorough. It was very manageable because we were working obviously full time too while we were doing this. It was spread out and very manageable. And they have also continued to be very helpful. Like when I come in, when we were doing research, when we were putting the course together, I met with Ben Page, who was, one of their curriculum designer guys and trainer, and he helped us. Like, this is what we want to do. Is this the best way to present this? And so they've been consistently very supportive, which I've really appreciated. All I can say is that I would research ones that are out there. And with it, I would be looking for ones that are recognized, at least nationally, if not internationally. Like I said, I know there's other ones out there. I don't know currently what those would be. I do know ANFT is pricey, but I do feel like it's been kind of worth it with that. I don't know if you can pull in district resources, sometimes applying for small grants within districts. If you can show, again, showing the research in a proposal, this is why it's going to be good for kids, and then using that to, see if you can get special project funding or some way. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for that, but we struggled with that too.
That's okay. People concurred with you that the training you did was well worth it, even though it was a little more pricey. So some good feedback in the chat on that. Before you talked about the cortisol level test or research, someone asked the question, isn't there also a research that showed cortisol levels decrease by as much as 20% by spending 20 to 30 minutes at a time in nature?
I don't know the exact numbers, but there's a lot of good cortisol research out there. Yeah.
Sounds good. We think so.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of research. We're getting it faster than we can even begin to consume it. So
this was an interesting question from Sharon. What does research show about whether doing outdoor activities such as mountain biking, ATV rides, horseback riding, create the benefits associated with soft attention? And there may or may not be research, but
yes. And I don't know that they specifically look at soft attention, but here's what I have learned along the way. And I can't say this is specifically assigned to a specific study. I just in different ways, and then going through the force bathing training. Yes, those things are great for improving heart rate. A lot of physical conditions, heart rate variability, obesity. There's a lot of benefits from being out there. So any way you're getting outside is fantastic. One of the things we see with that, though, is if you're hiking or mountain biking or running, is that you're not doing the soft fascination because you're not slowing down enough. What forest bathing does is it takes you out of the cognition, but also slows you down. You're sitting still, you're listening, you're moving very slowly. So it allows you to see those details that you miss when you're just walking past. And it's one thing we hear from our students. We have them do a sit spot every week for 30 minutes. And someone will say, I have walked past this pond 1,000 times. I've never noticed this. So the soft fascination really increases when you slow down. And so that's what comes in to be the difference a lot of times with just physical activity versus forest bathing or slowing down and spending time just sitting and being still with nature. So they're both great, but that's where the forest bathing differs.
Great. That was a really great answer and great question because I've wondered the same, but that makes sense.
Yeah. It's all good. We're not saying don't do it. Yeah. Do it. Do whatever you need to do to get out.
And you could do, a variety of things in a week to get your nature fix that touch on different.
We had students that they would bike to their sit spot, sit for the 30 minutes, and then bike back. So you're getting both, double whammy. It's good.
There was an add-on question to that, similar to Sharon's question above. Is it general thoughtful time in nature that is so beneficial, or is it from following specific forest bathing protocols?
I think the forest bathing protocols get you used to doing it. It's kind of like yoga. Yoga works very well at the beginning because you've got an instructor. And then when you kind of learn how to do it and you learn the practice, it's much easier to do it on your own. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have a full-on forest bathing diet every time you're doing it. But the idea of working yourself out of your cognition piece into your senses, the idea of learning just what some of the imitations might be, like and how to phrase them with students. Instead of saying, go out and find 5 colors. You don't want that, because I've just plugged your brain back in because you're trying to find 5, right? If I just say, go out and wander around, I wonder what colors you'll find. That allows that soft fascination to come in. So it's a way of framing it. So as you learn those pieces of it, yes, you very much can do it on your own. It's just kind of learning what those things may be like and how to check yourself into that soft fascination, because you don't want to sit out there and be by water and say, okay, I'm by the water, but I'm making my grocery list, you know? So it's a way to kind of still get you out of that cognition piece. But yeah, there's lots of ways you can learn to do that on your own individually.
So there were some other questions above this last one, but we're at 3. So I thought I'd just take this last question, and then Courtney, maybe I can send you the other questions that were also relevant, and maybe you can answer.
Okay.
We can try to answer them and send them in the follow-up email. But the last question, any research showing benefits for mentally and physically challenged individuals?
I don't know specifically, but I do know that with my ANFT training, there was a particular individual who's guiding, and she is completely deaf, and all her work is with the deaf community. And she has such a great following and does a lot. I do think that, like I said, I haven't specifically looked into the research and read it. I have seen titles coming through very much on especially children like with autism, because the world around us is so overstimulating that the stress levels and the agitation that happens is very high. So being out in nature, being in these calm spaces really does allow their body to calm down and then be able to process what's going on around them. So I do know there's some work with autism that comes up. I do know there's some work actually coming out of Scotland a lot, because they tend to have an older population. Like I said, my aunt's mom's turning 95 last weekend. They look at accessibility specifically for older populations because, it's a mobility issue. So, even if you have mobility issues, getting out in a space and having that time can be very beneficial, as long as it still fits that idea of, is it safe? Is it possible for me to get out there without feeling like it's too bumpy and I don't have a safe pathway to get, into an isolated area? So again, the area has to fit and accommodate for some of those special circumstances that you may have. But if it's accessible and you're in a safe place and you've got someone knowledgeable who's working with you on eliminating that external stimuli, there is definitely some work out there that shows those benefits. I don't have them here to send you, but I know they're out there.
They're out there. Well, thank you so much, Courtney. This was fascinating. I can't wait to go have some soft fascination. We appreciate you.
Look at the clouds. That's the biggest one, is like sky gazing. If you just go look down and look up, doesn't even have to be cloudy. Just get under a tree.
Oh, yeah, great idea.
So,
I'm definitely going to go outside after this. So thank you so much for presenting this webinar, and thank you all for being with us this afternoon. And like we mentioned, we'll be following up with the presentation slides and other resources and a follow-up email next week sometime. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming.